Greg used to hold my hand in public. That memory feels like it belongs to another woman. These days, he barely looks up from his phone when I enter the room. The mornings start with silence. He scrolls, sips his coffee, and grunts at the news. I place his breakfast beside him without a word. Sometimes I wonder if he'd notice if I served him an empty plate. I ask about his day, and he replies with a robotic fine. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. It's the loudest reminder that something is missing. I remember a time when I mattered. We'd talk for hours, laugh until we cried. Now, if I speak more than 2 sentences, he checks his watch or looks away. I ask myself if this is what marriage becomes, a shared roof and separate lives. I used to think I was the problem. Maybe I was too emotional, too needy, too much. But it's hard to ignore how empty I feel even when he's sitting 3 feet away from me. Then there's Milo, my golden retriever. He was a birthday gift 3 years ago, back when Greg still tried. Milo follows me from room to room, tail swaying like a gentle reminder that someone in this house sees me. When I cry, he rests his head on my lap. When I laugh, he gets excited, barking and circling like my joy is contagious. He waits at the door when I shower, lies under the table while I eat. It sounds silly, maybe pathetic, but he feels more present than my husband has in years. There's something sacred about the way Milo listens. No interruptions, no judgment. Just soft eyes locked on mine, like he understands every word. I find myself whispering secrets to him late at night when the house is still and Greg is asleep on the couch with the TV blaring. Milo lies beside me, head on my chest. I pet his fur slowly, rhythmically, and for a moment, I forget what loneliness feels like. Greg doesn't notice when I start painting again. Milo does. He sits by the easel, watching every brushstroke. His quiet loyalty gives me confidence to create, to feel again. Greg only comments when the kitchen's not clean or when I forget to buy his brand of cereal. He hasn't complimented my work in over 2 years. I showed him a piece I was proud of once. He glanced at it and said, "Looks expensive." That was the end of it. When I talk about this with my best friend Tasha, she laughs softly and says, "Honestly, Milo has more emotional intelligence than most men I've dated," but I don't laugh. Because it's not funny to realize your dog gives you more comfort, more love, more presence than the man you married. It's not a joke when I dread Greg walking through the door and count the hours until it's just me and Milo again. There was a night, not long ago, when Greg and I had one of our usual non-fights, those cold silences dressed as conversations. I tried to explain how distant he felt, how invisible I'd become. He exhaled and said, "Jesus, Natalie, not this again." That was it. That's all he had. I went to the guest room with Milo trailing behind me. He curled up beside me, warm and breathing softly. I slept deeper than I had in weeks. Woke up with his paw resting on my arm and tears dried on my face. I used to think cheating was about sex, about bodies. But lately, I've started to understand there's another kind, quieter, more complicated, emotional infidelity. When your heart belongs to something or someone other than your partner. I never meant for Milo to become my sanctuary, but I didn't stop it either. Because Greg stopped showing up a long time ago. And I couldn't survive without feeling seen by someone, even if that someone had 4 legs. Sometimes I watch Greg from across the room and wonder if he knows. If he sees how much I've drifted. If he notices how I pour all my love into Milo now. Maybe he does, and he just doesn't care. Or maybe he's as numb as I used to be. Either way, I've stopped waiting for him to notice. Because every day, I choose to give my love where it's felt, not where it's ignored. And right now, that love belongs to the one who never lets me feel alone. Greg's distance wasn't new, but something about it had started to rot. It wasn't just indifference anymore, it felt like contempt. I showed him a painting I worked on for weeks. He didn't even look up from his laptop. Still wasting time on that hobby? He muttered. I didn't respond. I just nodded and left the room. Not because I agreed, but because I was too exhausted to defend the parts of me he'd never tried to understand. He didn't want to meet me where I was. He wanted me to shrink until I fit into the version of a wife that served his convenience. And I'd been doing it quietly for years. Milo, on the other hand, noticed everything. If I sighed, he lifted his head. If I laughed, he tilted his ears. If I stood up, he followed. I started to center my day around him, not out of obsession, but because he made me feel alive. I'd wake up to his nose nudging my arm. We'd go for a walk, and for the first time in months, I'd actually look at the sky. I didn't realize how numb I'd become until he pulled me back into my own senses. His presence was a kind of grounding I didn't know I needed. I began talking to him, more than I talked to Greg. It started unconsciously narrating tasks, sharing thoughts, venting small frustrations. But soon it grew deeper. I confessed things out loud to Milo I never dared say to my husband. I'm scared this is all my life will ever be, I whispered one night. I don't think he loves me anymore. Milo blinked slowly and laid his head on my lap. That small, quiet gesture broke something open in me. Greg came home late that night, reeking of whiskey and silence. No apology, no explanation, just a slurred, "You're still up?" I nodded, then turned back toward Milo. He was the only one who noticed I was hurting. Greg walked past me like a ghost. The truth hit me during a phone call with Tasha. I told her I hadn't kissed Greg in months. She paused, then asked, "Do you miss it?" I didn't answer right away. I realized I didn't. I missed being held, being seen, but I didn't miss him. I missed the idea of partnership, not the person in front of me. Tasha didn't push. She knew. She always did. Then one morning, Milo didn't come when I called. Panic hit my chest like a freight train. I searched every room, every corner of the yard. When I couldn't find him, I called Greg in tears. His response? "He's a dog, Natalie. He'll come back." That sentence stripped away the last illusion I had. My pain meant nothing to him. He didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't even offer to help. I found Milo hours later, shivering behind the garden shed. He was sick. I wrapped him in a blanket and held him tighter than I'd held anyone in years. In that moment, I cried not just for him, but for every day I'd spent invisible in my own marriage. For the woman I used to be before I started minimizing myself for someone who never really saw me. That moment wasn't about Milo being gone. It was about realizing that I had been gone for years too. After that day, something shifted in me. I didn't fight for Greg's attention anymore. I didn't try to be seen. I stopped cooking for him, stopped waiting up, stopped asking questions I already knew the answers to. The emotional tie was severed, clean and quiet. I gave what little love I had left to the only being who gave it back. And I felt lighter for it. I knew what people would say. That comparing a husband to a dog was absurd. That I was projecting. That it was pathetic. But what they didn't see was how deep emotional loneliness cuts. They didn't understand how painful it is to sleep next to someone who feels like a stranger. To be touched out of routine, not desire. To be spoken to only when something needs to be done. Milo never asked me to shrink. Never rolled his eyes at my feelings. Never made me feel stupid for crying. In his silence, there was more compassion than I'd ever received from Greg's words. I found myself staring at Greg one night, watching the way he chewed his food, completely disconnected from the world around him. I tried to remember the last time he looked at me with love. I couldn't. The distance between us had stopped growing. It had calcified. It was permanent. And instead of mourning it, I accepted it. I let go. Not because of betrayal, not because of rage, but because I was finally done begging to be seen. Greg hadn't fulfilled me in a long time, but Milo? He gave me back pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. That kind of love doesn't need words. It just needs presence. And that was something Greg had long since forgotten how to give. Greg stood in the doorway with that same blank stare, asking if I was going to keep acting like he didn't exist. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told him the truth. You stopped seeing me long before I stopped trying. His silence said more than any apology ever could. There was no defense, no argument, just the quiet collapse of something already dead. I realized then that the fight had ended long ago. I just hadn't accepted it yet. The next week I sat across from a therapist, unsure what I even wanted out of the session. I told her everything, from the way Greg dismissed me to how Milo had become the only constant comfort in my life. She listened carefully, then said something that stuck with me. You weren't disloyal. You gave your heart to where it was received. That's not betrayal, it's survival. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel crazy. I felt seen. She asked if I still loved my husband. I didn't have an answer. Not because the love was complex, but because it wasn't there anymore. It hadn't been for years. I'd been holding on to the image of marriage, not the reality of it. The vows, the routine, the idea of forever, none of it meant anything if the person standing beside me wasn't truly with me. So I made a decision. Quiet, final, clean. I packed what mattered: my paints, my clothes, a few photos that reminded me of who I was before all of this, and Milo. Greg came home to a note, not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because there was nothing left to say. I didn't leave out of bitterness. I left because I'd spent too long asking for scraps of affection when I deserved a full meal. I found a small place a few towns over. Not much, but it had light, real light. Windows that poured warmth across the floors in the morning. Milo took to it immediately, curling up in every corner like he'd always belonged. I started painting again, not just for escape, but because something inside me was finally waking up. I uploaded a few pieces online, and to my surprise, people bought them. Slowly, I began to feel capable again. There were nights when I'd lie awake and wonder if I'd made the right choice. If walking away from a 10-year marriage over emotional neglect made me weak or impulsive. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to speak and not be heard, to cry and be dismissed. That wasn't love. That was erosion. One afternoon, I caught myself smiling for no reason. I was drinking tea on the porch, Milo resting his head on my foot. The breeze was soft, the silence peaceful. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't magical, it was just safe. And I realized I hadn't felt that in years. Greg made the house feel like a place I tiptoed around. Here, even in the quiet, I felt whole. Funny thing is, the more I think about it, the less this story feels like it's about Greg at all. He was a chapter, not the whole book. Milo, in his simplicity, reminded me of what it feels like to be noticed, to be loved without conditions or expectations. That kind of presence is rare, even among people. And yes, he's just a dog. But in that companionship, I learned what I truly needed. Consistency, care, connection. I thought infidelity required a third person, someone to steal attention, stir passion. But for me, it looked different. It was subtle, gradual, a quiet departure of the heart. By the time I physically left Greg, I had emotionally left years before. The truth is, I didn't leave for someone else. I left because I stopped abandoning myself. Milo didn't replace Greg. He reflected the kind of relationship I was starving for, one where my emotions weren't inconvenient, where presence mattered, where I could just be, and that was enough. That reflection was uncomfortable at first, but eventually it gave me clarity. I didn't need a man to fulfill me. I needed to remember I was worth fulfilling. Asterisk, I don't know what the future holds. I don't need to. What I know is this: I wake up every day now with peace. Not passion, not drama, just peace. And after everything, that's what I craved most. Some will never understand how a dog helped me find myself again. But the truth is, in his quiet, loyal way, Milo reminded me that I'm not too much, I'm not impossible to love. I was just giving my heart to someone who'd forgotten how to hold it. Asterisk, and that's not a tragedy. That's a rebirth. I didn't expect healing to look like this: silent mornings filled with sun, Milo's gentle breathing beside me, and the absence of chaos. I had braced for guilt, for grief, for the sting of regret. But instead, what followed was a strange calm. As if my body had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. I wasn't running from something anymore. I had simply walked away from a version of myself that no longer existed. Asterisk, there were moments, of course, where the old voices crept in. What if I had tried harder? What if I had stayed quieter, more agreeable, less emotional? What if I'd waited just a little longer? Maybe Greg would have changed. But those thoughts died quickly now, because the woman who entertained them wasn't here anymore. She left with the silence. I no longer confused loyalty with self-abandonment. I'd spent enough time making myself small for someone who never looked down to see me. Asterisk. People talk about infidelity like it's only about physical betrayal, but emotional betrayal is quieter. It doesn't leave lipstick stains or suspicious texts, it leaves hollow days. Nights spent wondering if you're hard to love. It leaves you questioning your own voice, because the person who promised to listen no longer even hears you. That's the kind that rewires you, and that's what Greg did. He didn't touch another woman, but he let me with her. And he didn't care. Asterisk, Milo never tried to fix me. He didn't have to. He just stayed. When I couldn't sleep, when I sobbed without explanation, when I stared at blank canvases for hours, he stayed. That kind of love taught me what real presence feels like. No pretending, no performance. Just showing up, every single day, without expectation. I never got that from Greg, not even in the beginning. Maybe I romanticized what we were. Or maybe I just believed in the potential of what we could have been. But at some point, potential becomes a prison. Asterisk, after I left, Greg called once. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just wanted to know where the mortgage paperwork was. That call confirmed everything I'd already accepted. I was never his partner, I was his background. I could have been anyone who cooked, cleaned, nodded at the right moments, and kept the house warm. He didn't lose me. He lost the routine that made his life comfortable. And that loss didn't seem to matter. Asterisk, I stopped needing closure. There was nothing left to untangle. No final confrontation, no teary confession, just silence. And that silence felt better than all the forced conversations we'd had in the last 2 years. I didn't need him to say sorry. I needed to stop waiting for him to start caring. Asterisk, I built a rhythm with Milo. Mornings spent painting, afternoons on walks, evenings listening to music I had once forgotten I loved. I started sleeping through the night. I stopped crying randomly in grocery store aisles. I started laughing without bracing for it to be taken away. Life wasn't suddenly perfect, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. Asterisk, Tasha visited one weekend. She looked around the cottage and said, "You look like someone who finally came home to herself." I didn't reply. I just nodded, because anything more would have made me cry. For once, someone saw the weight I'd been carrying without asking me to explain it. She understood that I hadn't left because I was unhappy. I left because I was disappearing. Asterisk, I looked at myself in the mirror differently now, not searching for flaws, not comparing who I was to who I used to be, but recognizing the strength in my own eyes. I had survived a love that slowly eroded me, and I walked out of it without bitterness. That's not weakness. That's self-respect. Asterisk Milo aged a little that year. His walks got slower, his naps longer, and I found myself terrified of losing him. But I also knew, no matter how long I had him, he'd given me something permanent. A reminder that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. That consistency is more valuable than grand gestures. That being chosen quietly, every day, is the kind of love I'll never settle beneath again. Asterisk I used to believe that my story was a cautionary tale. A woman who let herself get lost in loneliness. But now I see it differently. It's a story of clarity, of choosing wholeness over habit, of learning that being loved isn't the same as being seen, and that you can leave without rage, without scandal, without another person waiting for you. You can leave because the absence of love is enough. Asterisk I no longer chase approval. I no longer shrink. I no longer wait for someone to change into what I hoped they'd become. I exist fully now, quietly, honestly, and if anyone asks what changed, I won't say a divorce, I'll say a dog. Because sometimes, the purest love walks in on 4 legs, looks you in the eyes, and says nothing, but shows you everything you forgot you deserved.